It's a real concern for me, and we were having probably a very insightful chat earlier with our panelists. I kind of was going, I wish you guys were here. I wish the cameras were rolling. We could have sent it to you nicely condensed on your phones, because we basically covered everything up front. But for me, the message that I want to just get across before we even start, the fact that Nedbank Commercial is putting something like this together is crucial, because for too many South Africans, they just don't appreciate how important protecting, supporting, and helping to grow the local industry is. It is the backbone of our economy. And I made a joke about it with the guys earlier. Live life, live local, love local, support local. These are like these really cool buzzwords that we all use. We put it on our social media because it sounds really cool. But as we're doing that, we're hitting our next Shein or Temu order. And it's like the supporting of local is not just top end with manufacturing. It filters all the way through. If you have that mindset as a consumer in terms of making sure you're looking after local first, it does filter all the way up. So I think there's a definite attitude change that has to happen from a consumer perspective. But today it's really about talking manufacturing, industry, and obviously we're here not because we don't see value in supporting and looking after it, but it's like this industry is not under enough pressure as it is. Now we're adding more pressure because carbon is not about dating anymore. Carbon is about being ready and right for the environment in the future. And Amit, the only person that wasn't introduced by Colin was you. I mean, you're the main man today. You're in the hot seat champ. Not feeling too well, dealing with a bit of a bug at the moment, so putting on a brave face for joining us as well. Amit, I think just before we get into the carbon readiness study that you guys did with Narcam, just the thought process from a banking perspective, that you've even thinking of that. How did the idea to get together with Narcam and to do this study come about?
Maurice, I think we've got to look carefully as to what have we been facing, as a country, as an economy, the various amount of uncontrollables. We started the year off with closures of massive plants, or potential closure of massive plants. We then had the tariff matter that came up. We're aware of interest rates that were quite high, now on the down low. And I think for a large part of manufacturing SA, we were just stuck in headwinds and we were stuck with uphill battles, which then subsequently gets us as manufacturing SA, possibly in a potential of in a space of not necessarily taking action and being completely intimidated by the uncontrollables. So through our partnership with Narcam, which is one that we value closely and dearly so, for some months now, we were discussing the opportunity for CBAM. What does CBAM mean? And a lot of these conversations were confined to boardrooms, were confined to discussions with Narcam, with some of its members, ourselves at Nedbank. And then this light bulb moment came on. It's senseless us discussing it at our level without necessarily understanding what are these implications. What does it mean?
How can you help? Otherwise, you could be heading in the wrong direction.
100%. So I think as a bank, something we've come to realize very quickly is that products, solutions, designs can't be formulated in boardrooms. It needs to come from our clients. We need to understand in terms of what are the nuances that they are facing, how do we pivot around their nuances, and how do we solve for that? And I think at the outset was question number one, is carbon neutrality understood? Is CBAM understood? Is there a gateway from where manufacturing SA is now to where they need to be? And without knowing those answers for sure, or sitting on assumptions, we would very likely go in the wrong direction improving for these solves. So that's kind of what gave birth to this Narcam study, and I'm sure Beth can chat or elaborate on that shortly. One might ask the question, well, why did we go specifically into autos? So yes, we know that there's certain products that are exempted in the auto space. We do know that there's certain pressure areas in the auto space, and we're not oblivious to that. But one of the reasons going with autos is we wanted to be very specific about understanding what are the nuances on a specific sector. We wanted to utilize Narcam as an organization and as an association to utilize their base as a test case for something that we can apply the blueprint into other subsectors. So while we now refer to it as the Narcam Nedbank CBAM study, this ideally is the blueprint that we'd like to apply to all subsectors within manufacturing. But we had to find a starting point. And a starting point with an association that's as well represented as NARCAM, that's as strong as NARCAM, and that's not afraid to say what they mean. You know, there's absolutely, no airs and flares about the NARCAM as an organization. Fortunately, we have Bet today who's a little bit more politically correct than the executive director, Renee. But
Yeah, Renee does shoot straight.
but I think that's something what, to Corlad's point earlier on, this is not something that's coming. This is not something that's ahead. This is something that's right at our doorsteps. It's been measured from next year. How do we aid and assist our market in navigating these challenges? How do we control the controllables? How do we take back some power and empower our clients to navigate this from now being seen as a challenge to potentially a differentiating factor and opportunity from developing ourselves, our readiness level, to other developing countries?
Just hearing you break that down for me is kind of what I guess businesses need to do as well. They need to not headless chicken running around trying to figure stuff out. They need to actually strategize what are the relevant points for us. So as a bank, you've kind of looked at that and said, right, let's look at this industry. And I'm glad you brought up the point that, yes, we have focused automotive because there we go. It's a good starting point. It's well established. A lot of the big players have been here for many years as OEMs. They're under massive pressure. We spoke about the export market to Europe, heavily reliant. That changed big time, and Beth can lead to that as well. So good place to start. But I mean, this conversation is about way more than just the automotive. We're not just here to support that sector.
Yeah.
We're here to support local business, local manufacturing in any way, shape, or form. And even though it might be the Europe policies that are hitting hardest in automotive, trust me, they're not the only people. All the other markets are going to be doing the same as we go along. So for me, it's just really good foresight and vision. It's like, I know bankers never like to talk about their crystal ball, but it feels like as the green bank, you've got one in your pocket.
I guess being the green bank is something we take a lot of pride in. It's not just a goal, it's not just a target. Being the green bank is something that we pride ourselves on. And if we can't lead the way in sustainability, then no one else can. I mean, we've extended, 183 billion rand worth of green funding as Nedbank, which is, if you quantify and you think about that, it's an absolutely astronomical number. If you have a look at some of the partnerships that we're formulating now, and I think this is something that we need to also understand as banks, and I think Nedbank kind of gets it, is while we are the specialist in the advisory aspect when it comes to finances, while we are the specialist when it comes to check accounts, overdrafts, etc., we are not necessarily the specialist when it comes to carbon neutrality. We're not the specialist in production efficiencies. And this is why partnerships, with the likes of NARCAM, with the likes of DTIC, etc., are important. And I think this particular foresight that you're talking about, Marius, is we've recently signed on, some partnership agreements with two companies, Six Capitals and CSG. And our idea and intent behind these partnerships is understanding that as a bank, we understand banking, we understand finance. While we might not fully understand navigating sustainability and how businesses go about that, but let's partner with a company that can aid and assist our market in doing this. Because quite often, it's the task of actually doing a due diligence on who can do this for my business, who can do it for my company is so daunting, it actually gets you stuck. So we've taken that out of the equation. We've done what we needed to. We've vetted these particular companies that can aid and assist our clients in an advisory role on navigating their journeys with regards to sustainability. And I'm not talking carbon neutrality, I'm talking sustainability as a whole.
But I suppose, that for me is always the key. It's such a nice word, collaboration, but we sadly do it not often enough. It should be the backbone of everything we do, because there's no ways one business, Luca's business can't do everything, you can't do everything, and I think to lean on experts in their fields and to bring forums like this together, I think is the way forward, and how policy should be decided, chatting to people actually on the ground. I see Beth's nodding. Beth, let's bring you in here, because I think you're under pressure because you're like the real expert here. You've got all the facts and figures, and I love it, eh? No laptop, no notes, because it's all in Beth's head. Beth, from NARCAM's perspective, carbon readiness, talk us through how the study was conducted. Who were you looking at? Who were you referencing? How long did it take? And then I want to get down into some of the results, because, I can give you guys a quick snapshot, and it's like, 5 years, 10 years problem. Don't worry about it now. But there's a lot more detail we need to get into. So give us the background on the carbon readiness study.
Yeah, I think for us it was a really interesting opportunity in the sense of the sector's been undergoing an immense amount of change and disruption over the past, let's call it from kind of COVID onwards. And in a sense, we often reactive, right? A crisis comes, AMSA is possibly closing, US tariffs, and the NARCAM as an association in supporting our members is the response, right? What can we do now to support? And for us, this was one of the kind of big up-and-coming topics where we had the chance to be, I think you were saying, have the foresight. We had a chance to be proactive rather than reactive for a change and come up with a solution before it became a problem. The reality is at the moment, it's not the most pressing challenge that's facing our membership base.
Yeah.
They have much bigger opportunities but challenges to be dealing with in the short term. And so how can we as an association start getting all of the right people in the right places, the right content, all come together so that effectively when we do need to really move forward with decisive action, we have the answers to what is needed. So that's kind of how I suppose the conversation started coming up with Nedbank. And to your point around collaboration, I'm a policy person. I know a fairish amount about the industry. I know very little about financing. And it's about how do we bring the right brains together that have different expertise to put forward a holistic type of solution for the sector, rather than me just trying to think through a financial solution that I know nothing about.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think our conversation really started, and the partnership on this topic with Nedbank came about. From a kind of research perspective, we're very fortunate as NARCAM. We represent about 150 manufacturing brands. So most of your major tier 1 and tier 2 component manufacturers in the country form part of our membership base. And I think that's why I suppose we're credible to work with from a Nedbank perspective, is it's the reach into that, into the manufacturing space. So we ran the survey, myself and Meath and the team put together the survey questions, developed the kind of content we wanted to cover, and went well beyond CBAM. I think what is sometimes misunderstood is CBAM as a concept. It doesn't hit most of our manufacturers. It is a much smaller subsect of them that are directly impacted by CBAM. That doesn't mean to say sustainability doesn't matter. That doesn't mean to say that other subsectors aren't going to be hit, or hit maybe is a bit of a harsh word, but be impacted and required to decarbonize. So we did a much more holistic type of sustainability survey, also looking into water availability and usage, particularly from a Gauteng perspective. We know we've got troubles there. So we tried to put together a really holistic survey, ran it with our membership base, and then have come through with what you've seen is obviously an interim report. We're going to do further data analysis, breaking it down into different locations, subsectors, et cetera, to really get to the heart of it. But I think the results at a starting point give us certainly a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, data is key. I mean, so many businesses are making or breaking it based on having access to data. I think Lester and I were talking about this offline. Lester saying, like, we've got all the data, but how do we analyze it? How do we read it? Do we understand it? But Beth, I mean, I think for most of us, when we talk about this carbon journey, I think, and greening and environmentally thoughtful in our process, for most of us, we're kind of going, oh, we've put solar panels and we're looking at grey water and that is it. And that's good. It's a good place to start. And I think for most South Africans, we never made those decisions because we're so environmentally friendly. We did it out of flippant necessity because we had no power. We had no reliable energy source. So the Oaks had to reach out into that. So we've obviously seen that track quite well. But like you were saying, I mean, people are reactory in this business. So when there's no power, everyone's investing in it. Now that the power grid seems more stable, no one's investing in that stuff anymore. So from your research and from the survey, do we track fairly well in terms of, as a business, I'm aware that I've got to be aware of the carbon journey and the impact that my business has? Are most of the people aware?
So this is the thing. I was actually pleasantly surprised that more are aware than I was anticipating. So over half of the respondents, around 60% were aware and do have a level of strategy in place. The question, and I suppose the million-dollar question, is the strategy a surface level strategy? And as to your point, is it solar panels on a rooftop, or is it a much more intensive type of complete decarbonization approach? My honest sense is it's the former. Sorry, it's much more, as you rightly say. In fact, going I guess, a few steps back as to how we got into the sustainability topic, even with Nedbank, was I did my master's research on it, and from a metal subsector perspective in the component sector. And there again, you're absolutely right. The initial push to decarbonize or become more sustainable was load shedding. People were getting solar panels because, well, what else could you do? It was generators and solar panels. But cool, that's a problem, but equally that's a huge opportunity, right? We've got a problem, we're having to implement something, and now suddenly we're finding ourselves as a sector starting to move forward in a topic we knew we would have to tackle at some point. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, at least it is moving. So yeah, more have got strategies in place than not, which I think is a good start. You start to see when you look through the scope. So scope 1, everyone's got a fairish idea of what my scope 1 emissions are. Scope 2, it gets a bit fuzzier. Scope 3, it's like, oof, that is a whole nother.
What language are you talking? Because I don't get.
And that is a lot. And that ultimately, I mean, if we're talking Scope 3 emissions, we need a whole. It's not just component sector. That's the entire supply chain, and that's where it becomes trickier because you need everyone working together. We're a very globalized supply chain, and so there is a lot more moving parts to it. So I understand where the lack of understanding comes in there. But I think in the opening remarks, we're talking about what the challenges are. And certainly it is that deeper understanding, which I think still needs to come through. And as an association, that's something we certainly hope to support and create more knowledge around.
But it seems like, we speak about OEMs putting local manufacturers under certain pressure because they've got to react to global offices that are put under legislation and policy. But in much the same way, we should be doing that. And I look at Africa as an example. There's a lot of raw material that we send out, and then we're happy to go and buy that back at a cost, whereas we should try to incentivize manufacturing within there. You talk about batteries, whatever that technology is, instead of sending the raw materials out, certainly countries should have an alliance to work together, say, hey, we could manufacture our tires, yeah, you've got the rubber, you've got this, and those countries work together. And that, for me, from a carbon perspective, is already a benefit because you're not shipping things from across the world, you're using stuff that's already there. So a lot of the time, I just think people start thinking this big goal when there are other opportunities that are easier to get your company across the green mile, I suppose, in obvious ways, I guess. I don't know. Lester, how difficult is it to get all of the African countries to sit together and come up with an African model that's going to work, because there's massive opportunity here. We just need to stop sending our stuff away and start selling it as end product.
Yeah, and it's not easy. And many of you may know that we've started this initiative, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and how we are going to ensure that we trade more and better with each other and open up our borders and reduce the issues of tariffs between us. But you may also know that we trade amongst ourselves, and that's why this African continental trade came 14% of trade between Africans. The rest of it we export, or we trade with Europe, we trade with America, we trade with Asia more than we trade amongst ourselves. Yeah. So it's not easy. And the discussion is there, and some of the protocols have happened with regard to the various products between ourselves as within the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. But from an export perspective of, and Beth will know, the challenge our OEMs have here is that they would compete now against their own products from a second-hand perspective in the other markets. So those vehicles are coming in here and they are sold at a cheaper rate. The problem in many of the African countries is liquidity and disposable income. Yeah. And if you don't, and you're not sure whether you would get your money back from a particular country because of liquidity issues, or you don't have the volumes of people who could buy a brand new vehicle, that becomes the challenge of getting in those products into the African market, and that's something we need to look at. I wanted to quickly jump on the Salzgitter story that Luca was talking about. Now, can you imagine we have a Salzgitter in South Africa and taking our commodities and benefiting it here instead of importing it from Europe at a green product, and we green it out here? And that's what we need to do, because you are talking about commodities. Yeah. The bulk of our exports into the Asian markets is what? It's commodities.
But I mean, is that even an option? Just chatting with Luca, just the cost. Like, we've got to, to coin what Luca was saying earlier, you've got to focus on what we're good at doing are we not too far behind the game to even try and think of producing green steel here? And it's, I mean, you and I spoke offline a couple of months ago. Big steel manufacturer in the UK was closing. Within a week, policy was changed. Government was there to bail out and help. I mean, that's being flippant dynamic because we need a steel industry to have manufacturing going on. Is that not the case here in South Africa as well? But how achievable is doing green steel here?
I guess we need partnerships around it, but we cannot throw out the game that, you know, because they're doing it there and they're cheaper than us, so we should be just dumping our commodities out there. When do we start also enhancing our industrialization around that? You know, I know that there's Metal that having issues. There are many other mills that are also looking at closing because of electricity issues. But South Africa is a resilient environment. We all know, we spoke about it before this. And in many cases, we have leapfrogged many technologies where people thought, oh, well, it will never happen here. I remember years ago when I was in some conference in the UK and 3G had just come out in the UK. And this guy was telling us, oh, 3G, we've got it now. And I guess in 10 years' time, you will get it in South Africa. By December, we had 3G.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, look at that quick leapfrog. So we have that inside. We can do that. We have the resilience. I mean, in the past, we had, and we still have them, the likes of the CSIR, for example. And what they do during COVID in terms of respirators. How quickly did they come up with new things we can do around? So we have that. We had the Nels and we had the Amscors and all. So we have the ability to do that. And we can do this. So I don't think that we have to discount the fact that, yes, it may be cost prohibitive to get it in, but we have to start somewhere. We have to look at how are we going to beneficiate our commodities that we have here instead of just getting these commodities out and not beneficiating ourselves. And that's where the kind of job creation element can come in.
I mean, I agree with you, but I suppose we've got to look at, is that possible, Luke? I mean, your dealings with them, I mean, is green steel a viable option from a production perspective here in South Africa? What costs are we looking at?
Look, as I said, with Salzgitter, I can really only speak to what's been shared by them with us. I'm certainly not a metallurgist or a financier working in the steel industry, but you know, they have received fundings from both the federal and the state government in Germany. Mm-hmm. As I said, something north of 2 billion euros. They are significantly ahead of other players, even in Europe, potentially. I know that someone like Voestalpine is very close behind the heels, but yeah, they have a incentive to do it.
But I suppose it's also economies of scale.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's my fear. Yeah, in South Africa, we think, geez, we're the be-all and end-all. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we're so tiny in our demand and our consumption. So it's almost cost prohibitive sometimes to go and spend money on things that...
Absolutely.
Maybe we're barking up the wrong tree.
So I think Beth hit the nail on the head when she was talking about how the auto sector is driven by costs. You know, where there needs to be an incentive that drives us to introduce something like green steel. When you're paying a premium of 25% on your steel and 50% of your vehicle is made out of steel, that's a huge on cost. Yeah. There needs to be some driver of that sort of cost transition.
So how does that look?
I'm not too sure. I'd actually hand that over to Beth as the industry expert.
Yeah, hot potato.
Make that my problem, thanks for that. Look, I think to Lester's earlier point, the one thing that the sector does have is a very good investment scheme through AIS, and I think there's a role for AIS to play in terms of financing some of this. Look, reality is AIS isn't going to pay for the import of green steel. That's not what it's here for. It's here for investments in manufacturing and production, and that in part helps the cost competitiveness. So it's all part of a bigger puzzle. But for sure, I think certainly we're now in the position we do have a policy review coming up from an automotive perspective for APDP2. For sure, this needs to be a consideration within it, which is, well, what are all of the big global factors that are currently impacting global competitiveness? Let's take a full stock of them. Decarbonization is one of them, but there's plenty of others. I mean, I think from a global perspective, the industry is going under immense change from a whole variety of areas.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of every single element of that and then look at our policy program and say, okay, well, what can we put in? I don't have the immediate answers.
Yeah.
We obviously have to be realistic. We're in a fiscally constrained economy, so I can't go out there. The logical response from a NARCAM would be give us as much financing as possible. That's not a responsible response from me because that the government isn't in that position, and we need to work within the frameworks. I think this is where I know the word is kind of said a lot and how much it actually comes from it for public-private partnerships.
Yeah.
This is where we need to be working with the likes of a Nedbank and to see, okay, well, how do we all kind of come together, DTIC, component manufacturers, private bank, and say, well, okay, well, how do we? We know we have a financing problem. We know that is one of the biggest barriers to our sustainability. What can we do collectively that will ultimately see us securing the industry and hopefully growing the industry? And if we get the growth part right, then ultimately we'll all see the returns that each of our individual shareholders are wanting to see from us. So not a clear-cut answer for you, I'm sorry, but...
No, but I mean, but it's unrealistic to expect that. But I mean, I think we need to be having those sort of conversations as an industry. There are bigger pictures to look at here, and it is about securing jobs in our country. We've got the worst unemployment, and it doesn't help that we not turning that around by starting to look inwards and say, we can do this, we can make this, we can export this, we can build this. The cool thing to what Beth was saying, I mean, it's like, that is one thing that we do. We hear that term all the time from government, always saying, we can't do it on our own, we need the help of the industry. And like, in a way, I go, no, man, that's not fair because we're paying our taxes, we're paying everything else. But from a business perspective, for you guys, it's happy days because it's manageable, it's opportunity. And I know if I was a business owner, I'd much rather be dealing one-on-one with you in that regard, knowing that you've got my best interest at heart. So it's nice what Luca was saying just in terms of going down that path with you guys. They would not be here if they didn't partner with you guys on that. So are you seeing opportunities? Are you guys being proactive? This is very proactive, but are you pushing the boat out there and going to guys saying, listen, we can help you with this?
Yeah, Morris, I think the fact that we're sitting at this panel discussion today, very rarely would you find DTIC, NARCAM, and client. Well, that relationship you'll probably see very often between our client and us, you know. But one of the things that Lester and team at DTIC we were talking about is we need to dispel the myth that we're not in it together. We need to dispel the myth that the DTIC, the IDC is competition to the bank.
Yeah.
There's a place for everyone to exist in this ecosystem, and I think understanding that ecosystem well enough is what allows us a ticket to the game. So when we look at things at face value, one will say, no, this needs to make commercial sense to us. It needs to be commercially viable to us. We've got targets to meet. We've got shareholders to please, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very short-term view, something that we pride ourselves at commercial banking. Hence, you know, some of the partnerships that we've signed is how do we think differently about it? If we're going to continuously do what we've done all this way, all this way through, we're never going to see any fundamental difference. So what truly differentiates us as a bank is sitting next to a Lester, is finding a Lester. So what are some of the pain points that you have within your space? How can we work together in either co-funding, a blended finance? How do we aid and assist the sector to grow, and then by default we would grow as a bank?
Yeah.
This will then make commercial sense to us. At the end of the day, this is not a problem for the DTIC. This is not a government problem. It's not a Nedbank problem. This is a South African problem.
Yeah.
And as true as we are South Africans, we overcome our problems by rallying together. And we've seen this in numerous times in the past. Is that in difficult times we tend to pull together. I always look back on the 2010 World Cup, and I wish I could have that South Africa back again. But we've shown that we can rally together in solving for this thing. So, I alluded to it earlier on, this myth about IDC being outside and the bank being separate, DTIC being outside. No, that doesn't work like that anymore. And also, one has to also think about this from a commercial sense, from a risk perspective. Beth, Lester, Luca even touched on it. It is risky doing business in Africa. It's risky doing business everywhere. But the advantage about having partners in different spaces, we're able to mitigate the risk. So should something not work out as we ideally planning to work out, then immediately it goes not from Nedbank thinking on how to solve the problem, as a brain trust here is how do we solve this problem collectively. And then we have the voice of the client that comes in the room. This is what I've been through. We've got an association that comes in the room and says, well, I've noticed from my 150 odd memberships, this is what they experience outside. And then we've got the DTI says, well, I think we can look at it this way. I've just recently traveled I've engaged with the German consulate, and this is some of the, the workings that they've had around it. And that immediately mitigates the risk for us. So I think in Nedbank, it's something that I wouldn't say we've got it right and we've hit the nail on the head as yet. And I'm sure, they'll attest to that. But I think what we are getting right is the fact that we are now opening these conversations. We are now opening these dialogues, and we unsure of where we're going to end up, in all honesty. But what we do know is that there's a need for us to work together in solving this.
Any questions? Brendan, how are you, my man? I had my beanie on earlier when I arrived. I saw you in the car park, but I wasn't allowed to wear it on stage. How are you, Brendan?
Are we using a mic?
We've got a microphone that's coming your way. Just behind the pillar. Do you want to use this one here? Brendan, maybe just stand and they can see you there with the mic. We go. Cool. Thanks.
I'm Breno Naidu from the Sunday Times and Sowetan Motoring. Thanks very much for the discussion. Really insightful. Nice to be in the same room. My first point is more of a comment than an actual question. On the topic of transformation, hopefully in future, the next time we have a panel like this, it would be good to see representation from a thriving black-owned business in the manufacturing sector that has successfully decarbonized. So onto my actual question. This is for the gentleman from the DTIC. What can government and your department realistically do at this point to protect the local motor industry against Chinese imports that seem to be undercutting the top players in the market? We know the motor industry is robust, but it's facing some really tough realities at the moment. Nissan's operation in Roslyn, for example, seems to be under question. So how can we prevent a domino effect?
Lester?
Yeah.
You hear the question.
I heard the question, and it's not very easy to do that, because I said we're part of a multilateral environment. We're members of the WTO. We can't just willy-nilly go and say, look, I'm going to stop you from coming in here. As much as we'd like to do that, we are a small player in the environment. So we've seen that happening. What DTIC was trying to do is to say, how do we then encourage them to come in here and become a manufacturers of their particular product here? And that takes a long time, because you need to understand the market environment. You need to know whether you are selling enough units in this area to justify that. So, but it's difficult to then just go out there and willy-nilly just say, well, because they have gone through the exercises to understand whether the product can come into the country itself. They've done the whole issue around homologation and can come in. So you can't just willy-nilly go and say, well, I'm going to slap 100% tariff on you, and therefore you cannot bring your vehicle in. Also, you see there's a demand now for the vehicle in South Africa. A lot of people are driving now Chinese vehicles coming in here, because we spoke about it. It's cheaper now. It may become expensive. I mean, it's already starting to go up in terms of prices, because now they're competing against the other vehicles. So it's not very easy, but it is something that the DTIC is looking at and engaging with industry, with associations around it, and trying to see how do we walk that balancing act to deal with it. But it's not an easy thing to do.
I saw a few more hands. Yes.
Hi.
You're on. I can hear you.
Hi. One of the easiest ways to get to carbon readiness is to develop our own batteries over here. Why haven't we seen plans to do that for EV vehicles?
Are you talking specifically? So it's an interesting topic. We're going to talk batteries. You're saying easy way to go carbon readiness. For a lot of guys, when they talk automotive, I'll jump in here.
Sorry,
and
I'm
we'll
talking
move.
about EVs for electric powered vehicles, not just.
No, I hear you. So it's quite interesting. I'm gonna jump in here because we had a discussion about this offline earlier too. And it goes back to policies that are put in place as this is what's going to happen, and then seeing people move back. So I don't know if you remember 2025, this year, I think it was Netherlands, no more internal combustion engines. London wasn't far off. Have you had a look at what's happened, how that's all pushed back? The reality is that it's not always that simple. And the answer isn't everyone now drives battery-operated vehicles, because besides all the complicated things of what that does to the grid and the uptake is so tiny. But at the end of the day, your answer in terms of not just batteries for cars, as an industry, we could be playing in that space, because that affects solar, it affects everything. So it's not just about what you're putting in your vehicle. And at the end of the day, all of those raw materials that are in those batteries come from the continent. We know that. So I think it just lends to the conversation we had earlier about looking at our markets and saying, can we do something more with that instead of just having it mined and shipped? Can we create an industry that is conducive to creating that? Whether it filters into vehicles or whether it's going into supporting the industry from solar and storage capabilities. Lester, you were chatting about we do have some battery facilities here that are producing at the moment.
Yeah. So you are correct. It's not just in EVs. It's also the greater battery value chain from supporting solar to wind farms around that. And you may now recall that the bid window for battery storage just closed recently, and the minister just announced last week the winning bidders for that. And obviously, you may know that probably, well, you may not know, but probably many of them are going to import those batteries into this particular, but besides that, there is a discussion within the DTIC, and there are initiatives for us to look at how do we then encourage the manufacturing of those batteries in South Africa. Maybe not the cells coming in, because at this point in time, we don't have the capabilities, but there are a couple of companies that do it. There's one in Waterfontein, Freedom One, that does can do some gigawatt battery manufacturing around. There are others also within South Africa. But ideally, what we want to strive towards is to see how do we then take the raw materials that go into the manufacturing of the cell, and how do we then start manufacturing that within South Africa. Now, obviously, it's going to have to be dealt in partnership with those countries who have OEMs that have the ability to do that. But certainly we have the raw materials to go into that. And this is in partnership with our African brothers in the other countries, because we don't have all the critical minerals in South Africa. We have to get it from Zambia, the copper. We have to look at Namibia. We have to look at Zimbabwe and all our neighboring partners. And how do we then work together to create a battery value chain within the region, and how do we support one another to become ultimately a net exporter of the batteries rather than an importer of that, and that throughout the world, because we have that. It's a long-term idea and a strategy, and it's something we're working towards. And the DTIC has done some studies and work around that, and it's something we are going to focus on.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I've got the mic. Thank you very much. This has been a very insightful conversation, and I just want to build in terms of the opportunities, and where does our panel see opportunities within this context, or rather in light of all these challenges. So we're faced with CBAM from an EU perspective, and there's tariffs. If you look at the US, and if you think about the BRICS, there's been limited economic upside, really, if we think about it. So are we at risk of becoming geopolitically stranded? And is there an opportunity to diversify and look at other markets? And what are those markets? You did touch on us trading with each other from an African context, but does seem like there are limitations there, but are we actively looking, into new markets? And again, I'm going to ask, what are those? Thank you.
Sure, it's a big political hot potato. I mean, is that not that trip to America? Just to re-establish certain relationships.
Yeah, we are looking at new markets all the time, but it's just like in attracting investments. It's difficult to sell that investment, but it's easier to support an existing investor to expand. So you want to focus on your existing markets, and there are various strategies to within that existing market that you have. Is it a market where you can look at expansion opportunities in that market, or you consolidate your market, right? So those are the two things for existing: expanding or consolidating that market. So we make sure that we can get what we're getting in there at the moment, and when the opportunities arise there, can we then expand that market? And then you start looking at new markets, and you have to look at the new markets from whether there actually is an appetite for my product in that particular market, and whether those people in that particular market could be then fulfilling their obligations in payment for this. So there are some tools that the DTI has, particularly trade guys. There's a model called the decision support matrix, where you can, as a manufacturer or an exporter, get a sense of where there's an appetite for your product, a realistic appetite for your product in a particular market. So that's the model that we follow. So we are looking at other markets also. So our traditional markets would be in the Europe, would be the US, would be the Asian markets. People are starting to say into Russia, but there's a war there, and you see what's happening at that point in time. But we are looking at other markets. There is a drive towards Africa, but we know that, once again, I spoke about disposable income, liquidity in those particular areas. So our trade branch looks at the agreements that we also have, because that's another impediment you need to have in those particular markets around it. Are there favorable tariffs for products into those particular markets? What are the non-tariff barriers into markets? As much as the Chinese are saying we want to help you around it, but their market is not open for our products. We've been struggling. Our presidents have just agreed now on 100 products into the Chinese market. We now want to get the Chinese to say, well, you said 100 products. Can you then open your market for the 100 products? Whereas all your products are coming into our country without any hassles. In some cases, some of the products are coming here, we don't even know they come into containers. So there is the notion, not the notion, there is the effort in South Africa and at the DTIC to look at our traditional markets, to consolidate, to grow that, but at new markets. And how do we then help our exporters to understand, if you're going to the new markets, whether you can safely take your product into those particular markets, and we could help you get in there. But that's what we do, yeah.
We are feeling positive. We are feeling like there are good things that are coming. And I think it's really important to find opportunities in that space. So to wrap up with what was put together here today with Nedbank, I think is the start of the way discussions need to go forward. It doesn't help having policymakers making decisions on policy when there's no one on the ground who has to actually live with what that policy looks like. And it's simple. Putting a panel like this together, you start realizing that decisions aren't just made overnight. There's so many complicated factors that go into it. And all of us have the ability. We all have cell phones, we all have social media, we all have opinions, and it's very easy to express those. But sometimes it's really nice to sit back and have experts giving it to you from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in terms of what the future looks like. The truth is, the future has to be a green one. There's no two ways around it. And a lot of the time, that green future isn't always legislated by policies, but it's about how do we see us in our business in South Africa making a difference to the environment and the network that we interact in, the space that we work in. There are plenty of opportunities in this new space, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the feedback and the results are from the survey when it is bedded down into more info. I know we'll happily share it with everybody, the basic overview of it, but the positivity that came out of it was people know they need to make a change. Nice surprise that they realize that this is what the future looks like. So for us, thank you very much for taking the time out and for joining us. Lester, you all over the place. House in Durban, live in Joburg.
Yep.
Amith, you local? Very, very cool. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks for your expert opinion, for giving of your time, because time is also a commodity.
Yep.
So thanks for sharing it so willingly with us. And thank you for your time. I know the other things you could have been doing wouldn't have been as much fun as this. So thank you very much. We'll see you for some snacks. All right. Thank you.